Well, have a seat and turn to 2 Samuel chapter 12. Patty, you'll enjoy this. It's about suffering for a long time. 2 Samuel chapter 12, verse 15 and following. Well, just a few weeks back, I had a couple come to me and said, between our two parents on each side, our four parents, they had 17 divorces. I didn't know you could do that. And out of that multiplicity of mates, there was one suicide. She said, our families put the dis in dysfunctional. She said, by my husband here, he got me pregnant. And through all of that, I came to the Lord. And I began to grow spiritually, and of course he wasn't, and that irritated me greatly, because no matter how carnal your relationship is, when you started out, once you get married, you know, you want John Calvin from that time on. And so all of a sudden he wasn't what she wanted him to be, and she tried to change him, and that doesn't work. And she said, my friend and I were in a craft class, an art class, and she put on some tapes on the Song of Solomon that you taught, and I listened to them. And she said, I didn't like you one bit whatsoever. Talking about submission and letting God have your husband and you being faithful where you are. But she said, I began to realize just the brilliance and the genius that you are. She didn't say that, but she meant that, all right? And I repented and I said, God, I'm going to be what you want me to be. And it got his attention, and I gave him those tapes and he listened to them, and God got his attention and he got converted. And together we have, God has turned our life around, and we're now heading off. We wanted to come by and thank you. And I've never met this couple, but they said, we're now heading off to do mission work in Turkey. And I thought they were saying Turkey, Texas, out by Esteline out there in West Texas, the home of Bob Wills, you know. And they said, no, we're going to the Big T, to Turkey. We're going over to Asia Minor. And I said, good night. All of this just by them getting an ear to what the Bible had to say. Can God do that? It's amazing. You know, one of the uniquenesses of our faith is that it's not just a set of rules or disciplines. It begins with in the beginning. And it's the story of God in the creation and his ordination of history. That this is reality. It's man that lives in the illusion. God creates what is true, what's really happening. And so when you read the Bible, you're reading about reality. It's a story, the story of God and his work in man. And another thing is that it's the only religion that when you read the document, you get to be part of the narrative. It'll suck you into the narrative. You all of a sudden have to meet the author, because you find out that when it's over, the only thing that'll still be standing will be the book. Everything else will pass away. And so Christianity has that blessedness to it. Christianity and true Judaism is that it has what are called testimonies of people whose lives get radically changed by the grace of God as revealed in the Bible. It was Harry Ironside that was asked to debate an atheist once, and he said, I'll debate you if you will bring one person whose life has been dramatically changed for good by atheism. And I will bring you 100 men whose lives have been radically changed by the grace of God through Jesus Christ. And the guy never showed. Because that's what Christianity offers, is the radical proof, not just through apologetics, but through the objectivity of men and women whose lives have been transformed by the truth of the gospel. Well, that's what we're going to see in this text. Is what God is going to do in a life. You just hold on here and watch this. In verse 15, Nathan went to his house, and the Lord struck the child Uriah's widow bore to David. The child was very sick. It will take 7 days to die. And David is on his face for 7 days. And David, in verse 16, inquired of God for the child, and David fasted, and he went and he lay all night on the ground. David began to pray as he had never prayed before. And it is kind of odd because if that child dies, the explanation of what David did and the reminder of what David did dies with him. It's all gone. If David's prayer is answered and somehow the mercy of God is such to let that child live, now he will live with that living reproof of him, that reproach of him, and that son, this unnamed son, who's going to die. Incidentally, make a note, he will die at 7 days. When do you get circumcised in Israel? 8 days. So it's before his baptism, in a sense. And so David prays because David doesn't seek the easy way out. Out of sight, out of mind. And I have nothing now but a memory. No, David is willing, like God said of Israel in the book of Jeremiah, to bear the reproaches of his youth. And sometimes we all have to do that we go through with mental scars and visible representations of what we've been through. As a result of sin, Jesus will never relinquish those scars. He is the Lamb standing as if slain. And you and I, through our sojourn down here, we still have some memories, don't we, that we have to go with. Romans chapter 6. What benefit were you receiving from the things of which you are now ashamed? You remember some stuff you did. And if you're like me, you wince when you think about it. I think it's interesting that the two big boys, Peter and Paul, that went to the Jews and the Gentiles respectively, those two men both had nail prints. Paul was the chief of sinners, the least of the apostles, not worthy to be called an apostle, the least of the saints, because he persecuted the church of God. He was the apostle born out of time. He was miscarried. He didn't go through 3 years gestation like the rest of them. He got slapped off a donkey. And so Paul never forgot that. I held the garments for the men who stoned Stephen to death. I forced them to blaspheme. He never forgot that. And I think because God gave Paul such enormous revelations and such a ministry that impacted such lives that he couldn't handle the truth. And so God gave him a limp, just like Jacob. And he walked with that reproach. Did Peter have some things to live down? Good night. He was the fellow that denied the Lord 3 times. You know why we put on houses weather vanes with roosters? You know where that started? After the Protestant Reformation. When the Protestants in Germany would send the message that I'm a Protestant, I am not a Catholic anymore, and I do not hold to the authority of your Pope, and I don't think that he got it from any sublimeness of Peter. Peter, when the cock crowed, would blow wherever the wind took him. And so they put on their barns weather vanes with a rooster. And that's where it came from. It was a sign to all around them that we are not Catholic and we don't hold to the exaltation of Peter. Now, how would you like that to be the legend that you left? That you're part of antique sales, all right? You're part of stuff at Cracker Barrel. Why do you got a rooster on top? Well, it remembers Peter, who denied the Lord 3 times. And so Paul and Peter had some hard things. We got a fellow in our congregation, a dear friend of mine, spent time at Huntsville. And when he was in Huntsville, he got him some tattoos. Now, these weren't the normal, wholesome, edifying tattoos that you get. Don't email me, all right? Leave me alone. I know you got great tattoos. These were old jailhouse tats, and they were pretty raunchy. I've never seen him because he's never without long sleeves, ever. I had a special baptism service for him where he could get baptized because he was always ashamed of the sins of his youth. God forgot him? Sure. He's spotless, but he could remember. And so a lot of us have some emotional tattoos that we walk around with. If you knew about me what God knew about me, you wouldn't come here. But if I knew about you, we wouldn't let you in, all right? We would cuff you and haul you off. All of us. Matter of fact, my son, I got to tell you this. When he went through the Secret Service, they gave him a 7-hour polygraph. 7 hours. And the guy that gave it was a different kind of a fella. He was down from the South, and he said, now, son, I'm going to ask you some questions. Do not lie, because I will catch you. Now, you don't have to be great and moral to be in the Secret Service, but you can't be a liar. So do not lie. And I want to ask you before we start, have you ever killed anybody? Don't answer me. Because if you have, it's going to show up, and there is no statute of limitation. We're going to haul you off, put you in jail. Because they've done that before. Had these guys want to be on Secret Service. Have you killed anybody? Oh, no. Beep. Cuffed him, and he's gone. So if you've lied to anybody, or if you've killed anybody, he said, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee, and you need to be gone. So we're all carrying some stuff around. You ever killed anybody, kid? Of course you have. All right. Well, verse 15. He struck the child that Uriah's widow bore to David, and he was very sick, and he inquired of God. And he fasted, and he lay all night on the ground. And the elders of his household stood beside him to order to raise him up from the ground. These elders, I want you to watch them. They're almost a Shakespearean device in the background to be a foil of David. To compare David's faith, these guys are watching him. And you're going to see how normative people regard great faith of going through hard times. They, in verse 17, tried to raise him up. Put down the word hopeless. They feel, David, this is hopeless. God has struck this child. This child will die. You need to give it up. It's like when Christ went to raise that little girl and they all laughed at him. He said, she's not dead, she's asleep. They laughed at him. And so a lot of times, guys from the outside, when they see us pray and trust God, that they say, shut her down. It's hopeless. There's nothing that can happen. Your prayers will not be heard. Let it go. And in verse 17, he was unwilling and would not eat food with them. And it happened on the 7th day, the child died. The servants of David were afraid to tell him. Put down the word fear. I'm afraid that this unanswered prayer, this man who has put his hopes in God, I'm afraid that religion is going to make him throw himself off a bridge. He's going to harm himself. If he was this disconsolate with the child dying, now that the child is dead, he cannot handle God's refusal to answer this prayer. And so in verse 18, they were afraid to tell him the child was dead. They said, if the child was alive, when he was alive, we spoke to him and he didn't listen to our voice. How shall we tell him the child is dead? He might do himself harm. You ever seen people that trust God through great hardship and you shake your head and you say, how can they do this? In verse 19, David saw that the servants were whispering. And David perceived the child was dead, and David said to his servants, is the child dead? And they said, he is dead. And David arose from the ground, and he washed and anointed himself and changed his clothes, and he came into the house of the Lord, and he worshiped. And then he came to his own house, and when he requested, they set food before him, and he ate. David showered, and he changed, and he put on cologne, and he went to church, and he ate. And in verse 21, what is this thing you have done? Put down the word puzzled, hopeless, fear, puzzled. How can you arise after an unanswered prayer and keep on going? A lot of times, great faith is puzzling. Remember Acts 16 when Paul is in prison? They're in the stocks. They have been beaten. And what do he and Silas do? Do you remember? They sing. What do they sing? What all Jews sing. They sang the Psalms. They didn't have Louie Louie back then. All right. They sang the Psalms about the deliverance of God of his Old Testament people. And now we will have the deliverance of God of his New Testament people. It's the same God. And so they sing. And you remember what it says? And they were all listening. How can these men sing with their backs beaten in stocks at the bottom of this prison? And all of a sudden the answer came and the prison fell. And the jailer said, "What must I do to be saved?" He had been watching. And so they are puzzled. How can you keep on going? Especially when the circumstances are so distressful. You have rebuke, sin, shame, chastening, now death, humiliation, and you ask God to save this boy, and God said no. Can that be an answer to prayer? Yeah, sometimes it's an answer. No, the answer is no. How can you keep on going? Hasn't God failed you? Well, there's a number of reasons in verse 22 that David is going to give. One dominates, the others are kind of tacit. Let me give you 6 unspoken reasons and then look at the 7th, which is spoken. One reason I think David can get up is that he knows that God's ways are righteous. Like Eli said, "It is the Lord, let him do what seems good to him." He makes no mistakes. It was Moses who said in Deuteronomy, "I proclaim the name of the Lord, the rock. His work is perfect. All his ways are just. A God of faithfulness and without injustice. Righteous and upright is he." Did God ever give Job answers to what was going on? No, he didn't. He didn't say, "Job, Satan and I got in this discussion." He did ask Job 70 more questions that Job could not answer. And he let Job know, I am in charge of what you don't understand. I make no mistakes. What's the answer? I won't tell you that. But I will tell you who I am, and I make no mistakes. You trust me. It is not blind faith. It is trusting in a perfect deity. You trust me. And so he knows that God's ways are righteous. And he also has a recognition of God's sovereignty. How does this go? The Lord giveth, the Lord taketh away. We tend to hold on to our gifts. They become ours. And we claim them as ours, and we will not let God deal with them. No, Job said, I had 10 kids by his grace. I didn't have them. Without him, I wouldn't have had them. Their day is appointed, and they are gone. He wasn't happy, but he was not doubting. Not at that point. God, you're in charge. He also had a trust in God's justice. God said, this child will die to vindicate my name that you have drugged through the mud. He begged for God not to do that, and God said no. And so he trusts in God's righteousness, God's sovereignty, God's justice. Also his mercy. Because who is the one still alive here? David. What could have happened? He could have been dead. God said, you shall not die. David knows that he has gotten off better than he deserved. And he is also still a king. Psalm 51, take not thy Holy Spirit from me, which is what God did to Saul. And God didn't do it to him. God's still going to let him continue. He's still a king, and he still has a future. Is there a promise called the Davidic covenant that his descendant will build the temple? And though he may be visited with the stripe, my loving kindness I will not take away. He still has a future and a hope. He doesn't know what it is, but there's a hope. And also, here's the big one though, it is David's duty to trust God. And this is what he says in verse 22. While the child was alive, I fasted and I wept because I said, who knows, the Lord may be gracious to me that the child may live. God may act. There is always that possibility. God may do this. He has said the child will die. That is not a promise or a covenant. It is a commitment that he will do. And God can alter that. It was Matthew Henry who wrote on this. God gives us leave to be earnest with him in prayer for particular blessings from a confidence in his power and God's general mercy, though we have no particular promise to build on. We cannot be sure, yet let us pray, for who can tell God will be gracious to us in this or that particular. When our relations and friends have fallen sick, the prayer of faith has prevailed much. While there is life, there is hope, and while there's hope, there is room for prayer. Matthew Henry said, God can always be sought. You remember whenever God told Moses, I'm going to kill all these people and start over with you. That's what I'm going to do. And Moses said, God, if you do that, everybody's going to talk about how you just took them out in the wilderness to die. God, defend your name. And God said, okay. And he did it. At Nineveh, 40 days you're going to be overthrown. Let us pray if perhaps God may be merciful, and God was. There is always the chance of God's mercy. Is anyone sick? Anyone suffering? James said, let him pray. And so David said, I trust in God's goodness. He might change his mind, not his promises, not his nature, but he can alter his actions. Good men can all of a sudden be judged because they changed and became evil. Evil men can all of a sudden be blessed because they repented to good. And so God, because his character is unchanging, can alter his individual actions depending on repentance or sin. And so there's always a chance. So David said, I prayed because God is good. And then he said this, and the rest of verse 22 and 23, if you are a Christian in psychology or studying the mind and an emotional relationship to God, these are classic verses. David said, but now that the child has died, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? The answer is no. There's someone who can speak and the girl's spirit returned. That's Jesus. Jesus can do that. Jesus can say, Lazarus, come forth. Actually, he probably said, Lazarus, come forth. You remember what Martha said? It's a very dainty verse. Lord, he stinketh. Martha always said what everybody else was thinking. He stinks. He's been in there 4 days. Jesus can do that. You and I cannot. Paul and Peter can when told to do that as apostles, but we can't. David says, I can't do this. I know when I have to walk away. The child has died. I can't bring him back. In Israel, you don't have seances. You don't speak to familiar spirits. You don't have Ouija boards. You don't try to go to the beyond to do it. You stay out of it. And so David said, there's no hope. Once the child is dead, there's nothing I can do. Is that a healthy attitude we need to have at times? I've done what I can. My actions have come due. I have prayed. God said no. And so I've got to turn this page. How many of us know Christians that have stopped and squatted in the path right where they are and they don't move? Because God has done some things they don't understand, and they have said, I will not continue. There's a time you've got to turn the page. Does David know the glory that's about to happen to him? And there is. He doesn't know it. But there's times you have to, in complete faith, trust him. And you say, I'm turning the page and I'm going on. And so David said, this is my duty. It is the Lord. Let him do what seems good. I will now play the hand I'm dealt as best I can. And so David said, I can't bring him back. But in verse 23, I will go to him. Number one, David will die also. And I don't think the term, I will go to him, is simply talking about death. It is talking about beyond. David believes, as all biblical believers do, in life after death. Amen? And the immortality of the soul. In the Old Testament, guys didn't go to heaven per se. They were gathered to their people, to Abraham's bosom, waiting for the death of Christ when they would enter into paradise. But for simplicity's sake, we'll say heaven. Now, that child is in heaven. I'm not going to go into great length, but I'm always asked the question, what about infants? What happens to them? I will go to him, that they go to heaven. When does a child stop being an infant, and when is God does regard him now as culpable for his actions? It doesn't tell us that. And it's probably good. Because if God said 13, a lot of you would be looking at your sixth grader going, you know, I better throw him off a bridge. I really should. Yeah. And there would. Throughout the history, it would be part of a church service, you know, it'd be the shooting of the sixth graders. Don't email me. Just leave me alone. But God won't tell you. But David said, I'm going to go to him. Is that a comfort to us? That we shall be together with the Lord? Oh, W.L. Brown. How many of y'all remember W.L. and Joy Brown? He passed away about, 8, 9 years ago, I guess, and he was such a dear fellow. And when he was dying, I went and visited with him, and we said to him, you know, you're going to see your father, you're going to see your mother. And he said, yeah, but that's not what I'm thinking about. I said, what are you thinking about? He said, I'm going to see Elizabeth. And I said, who's Elizabeth? He said, Lewis, that was his son. He said, Lewis and Dallas, his wife, they finally got pregnant and they had a little girl named Elizabeth. And at 9 months in the womb, she died. And they had to induce, and she was born stillborn. And he said, and the tears would start down his cheeks. She looked just like Lewis. And he said, when I die, I'm going to see her. And he said, I'll know who she is when I see her. Well, David says, I know who he is. Has this boy gotten a name yet? You name him in the temple. You name him at the tent. He hadn't been circumcised. There are no ordinances given to him. And David says, he's in glory. Well, David says, and this is a lesson to us, that I've got to turn the page. And so why could you get up and go on? Answer, I have to. I have to go on. I have to reckon what I can't do, but what I must do. I will see that child someday, distant future. Between then and now, I have to go on. Let us not grieve as the rest who have no hope. You know what that means? You be careful how you cry at a Christian's funeral. I was doing a funeral one time for this dear lady. She fell over dead in the front yard, getting ready to go fishing. And knew the Lord, and we buried her in her 30s, 40s. And she had a daughter there that just kept wailing. It's not fair. Kept going on. And after a while, I said, I've had it. You ever just had it with a funeral? And I said, whoa! We will not dishonor your mother by wailing, "It's not fair." Your mother is in glory. God made no promise to her to live to be 90. Amen? Who wants to live 90? She's in glory. So let's don't be doing all that. And I've had to do this at high school funerals of a Christian kid that died. And everybody starts going through their song and dance through a lot of this emotion. And I go, wow, whoa, chill. Y'all are dishonoring this person. They're in glory. They trusted in Christ, who died at 33, tortured for 6 hours, that God could save them. And so cry if you want, but don't cry like you are, like the worst thing in the world has happened. The worst thing in the world that happens is when you grieve as one who has no hope. That's grieving. And so David says, we're going to turn this page and we're going to go on. Amen? You got to go on. I heard this last week. I was up in New York. I heard a lady speak I'd heard about for years, and she happened to be there. It was Verdell Davis. Her husband was Creth Davis, who along with Trevor Mabry and a number of men died in a plane crash in the late 80s. They were on the board of Focus on the Family. They were coming from Montana, and I want to say Montana, and out in Colorado, they went down in this private plane to look at the story seemed to be at a body of water down there in the valley. And then they came up, and the air was such in its thinness that they couldn't get enough air pressure to get out of that valley. And all they could do was just circle, trying to find a way out, and they couldn't. And they crashed, and it killed all of them. And they could not find their bodies for 3 days, and this woman had to pace in her backyard waiting for 3 days to try to find this needle in a haystack. And they finally found it, and her husband was gone, and all those in the crash. And she now had an expertise in a degree she didn't want, and it was grieving. And she spoke at this conference I was at to probably 150 people about grief. And a lot of people showed up, and there were a lot of hurting people. And she said something so interesting. Verdell, she lives in Dallas now. She said, here's how I dealt with that. She said, at the first, I wanted to say to God, I had the script written. I was the wife of a Baptist pastor, and we had our kids, and life was great. The script was written, and I didn't want you changing the script. She said, how'd she put it? The actors were in place in my drama, and I didn't want you messing with the actors. And then she said, the furniture was in place in my house, and God, you tampered with it. And she said, that's the way we are. We put these death grips on our life, that they're ours now. And she said, my husband was the end all of my life. And she said, I realize now that I had to not forget him, but I had to make him a picture on the wall, and I had to go on into what God wanted me to be, because my life was not him. My life was God and whatever he wanted me to be, and he could not be the end. He had to be a picture. Is that good, wholesome mental thinking? Amen. When you start hanging on something, when somebody's drowning and you're going to save them, what do you have to be careful of? That you don't become the victim, because they will take you down by putting a death grip on you. And so be careful about your mate, your kids, your job. I personally feel that I have a sovereign right to be healthy all the time. And when I have post-nasal drip, my thought is, there is no God. That's the way I am. Well, this is pretty wise stuff right here. Why are you moving along? Answer, because I'm smart. And I know that I can't undo what's been done. But I do know that I'm going to see that child again. And I've got to go on all the way until the death. Let us run with endurance the race set before us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, who ran to the end. So let's go on. Or as the great prophet said, Augustus McCrae and Lonesome Dove. Remember when he did that funeral? And he said, let's go on to Montana. The best thing to do with death is to walk away from it. Let's go on. Well, watch this. In verse 24, David comforted. David's pain now becomes his pulpit. David now ministers comfort as he was comforted. He said, darling, I asked, God said no, the child has died, but the atonement has been made. It's finished. Let's go on. God has shown us mercy. Now let's go on. Let's dry our tears. Psalm 86, passing through Baca, they make it a spring. Baca is the Hebrew word for weeping. And passing through Baca, you don't stay there, but you pass through it. You make it a spring. It's going to become somebody else's place of blessing. You know, back in the 90s, I got calls all the time about love, sex, and marriage. I was a Song of Solomon guy. It was great. Now I'm the depression guy. It was more fun being the sex guy, frankly. Hello, Tommy, I'm on a bridge and I'm going off. Okay. Hang on. That was an expertise I didn't want, and it got forced on me. But I've been able to help a lot of other people with it. So he comforted his wife. You know why he comforted his wife? Look at this. It's not undone. Wouldn't you thought God would have said, no more sex for you, no more kids for you, and I'm not even going to recognize your marriage, you adulterous whatever. He comforted his wife. He can still bloom where he's planted, in this disadvantageous place where he is. Paul, writing to women that have unbelieving husbands, let them observe the chaste, respectful behavior of their wives and be won without a word. Bloom where you're planted. Paul, the unbelieving mate is sanctified by the believer. Otherwise, your children are unclean. Now they're holy. They're the children of the believer. Bloom where you're planted. So David goes to his wife because God says you got to go on. Well, God, we didn't meet under ideal circumstances. I know. God, we met in an affair. I know. We met with a child born out of wedlock. I know. I know you did. And I dealt with it. And now you've got to go on. Well, in 24, he comforted his wife Bathsheba, and he went in to her and lay with her. You know why? He's going to start over. We're going to have another child. Now, don't look at the text. How many of you want to gamble as to whether God gives them another child? Children come from the blessing of Lord. Anybody want to bet? How many of you want to think it says, and David went into her 4 times a week for the next 9 years, and nothing happened. And God saith unto him, no child for you, goober. What do you think? That's what we would say. Serves him right. Verse 24, he lay with her and she gave birth to a son. God put his blessing on it. And life now starts again out of this parched ground. You know what a lot of you are saying right now? That's not fair. He did that evil. He should be drier than the Kalahari. God said, I'm going to make him fruitful. What'd you say at the beginning of this narrative? Whenever I talked to you about the child will die and the sword will not depart from your midst, you said that's too harsh. Now God blessed the union. That's too lenient. Which you going to be? Behold the kindness and the severity of God. And so a child comes. My brother told me, who does jail ministry, he said there was a fellow that got sent up for his crimes, and he was doing a hard time in prison, and through that barren experience, he came to faith. And he put his trust in Christ, and for the first time in his life, he had hope of being something. And he began to minister to others. He got to be a prison assistant chaplain, and then he got to be the chaplain's go-to guy. Got to be a trustee, and after a while, he was so good, they cut his sentence, and he got off 4 years early. You know what he did? He turned down the parole. He said, I have found life in this prison. I want to stay here. How about that for you? That's blooming where you're planted. Can Joseph minister in a jail? Yeah. Can Paul minister in a jail? Can he write Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and 2 Timothy from a jail? Sure he can. And so God blessed the union. And watch this. She gave birth to a son and named him, what's the Hebrew word shalom mean? Peace. We named him Solomon. Peace. He recognizes I'm at peace with God. God's forgotten it. You know what I almost think of right here? Be anxious in nothing, but in everything by prayer, supplication, thanksgiving. Let your requests be made known to God. And the peace will guard your hearts and minds. You lay it down and see what God will do. Now, had God told him he was going to give him another child? He didn't. You just have to trust him and walk on. A changed man walking now in obedience. If you're doing a diamond and it shatters, take the parts and make littler diamonds. But you go on. In verse 24, the Lord loved him. This may have been the point that he was told that the fulfillment of the Davidic covenant, one of your descendants will build the temple. This is him, Solomon. The Lord loved him. There would later be another son that would come from this son that would be the Prince of Shalom, the Prince of Peace. It is Christ. In the genealogy it says, he who was born of David and the one who was Uriah's wife. This will be a picture of grace for the rest of history. And God sent him a baby present. Verse 25, God sent word through Nathan the prophet. You think David was nervous when he knocked at the door and he opened it up and saw Nathan? He thought, good night, Nathan shows up. What's about to hit? I got a word from God for you. Go ahead. God says he's got a nickname for the boy. What? Jedediah. You know what that means? Beloved of God. I love him. Isn't that amazing? Well, he named him Jedediah for the Lord's sake. How's the text end? Glory to God. What a lesson. Conclusion, because I know just sure as I'm standing here, some of you have gone through great pain. What do? You repent. Sovereignty of God notwithstanding, you repent where you are when you get called to account. And then in the after effects that come from it, you pray. Who knows what the grace of God? You fall on your face and you seek God. You be a changed man. And then third, you rest in the answer of God. 3 times I sought the Lord to take it away. And 3 times he said to me, no, 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 my grace is sufficient. And then once that answer is given, you start over where you are and you walk away. but you bloom where you're planted. Don't you walk away the same person. And whatever you have been forgiven, you now look for the unexpected mercies of God. You let God now do, as he did with David, exceeding abundant beyond what God asked or even thought. A number of years ago, there was a couple, 5 kids, 10-month-old daughter, got a virus, sick at 9, 3 o'clock, was gone. Lost her. Wife came to know Christ through it. The husband went into a 2-year depression until God just kind of put his hand on him and said, you'll be okay. And he came out of it. Took a guy that began to disciple him and teach him, began to bring him along to maturity. And after a while, this guy said, I found more joy post-Pammy, that was her name, post-Pammy's death than I knew before. I believe I want to spend my life being a blessing to others. What do I need to do? Guy, how can I get smart like you? The guy said, you need to go to seminary. Where'd you go to seminary? Dallas Theological Seminary. Went to Dallas Theological Seminary. And became the oldest graduate in the history of the seminary when he graduated. His name was Mel Summerall. And right there. And he started a church up here in Denton. And then he said, God, you need to bring a genius my way. We got together. Everything that has happened in this church, on these grounds, with our missionaries, and all that God has done here, we never really planned to do it. It started with a virus in a 10-month-old's heart. And God didn't say, and here's what's going to happen. She's going to die. Patty's going to come to faith. Mel, you're going to go and get in discipleship. You're going to do this. I'm going to move you here and this, that, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, you're going to be sending guys out internationally. He didn't say that. All you knew is by 3 o'clock, she's gone. Now you trust me. And that's the Christian life. It may not be that sensational, but it's always going to be that. There's going to be times none of us gets to skate on this. How would you have liked to be blind? That's tough. I look at guys that are without sight, and I just shake my head and I say, man, you can do anything. If you have learned to circumnavigate this, you can do it all. Well, there was a fellow who was a pastor in England in the 1800s. His name was W.W. Walford, Warwickshire, England. And he met a fellow whose name was Thomas Salmon. He was a British minister in the United States who had come to the United States. And he talked about this blind pastor. And he wrote of him, he said he was a man of obscure birth, connections, and no education, strong mind, retentive memory. And in the pulpit, he never failed to select a lesson well adapted to his subject, giving chapter and verse in unerring precision, scarcely ever misplacing a word in his repetition of the Psalms, the New Testament, the prophecies, the histories, so as to have the reputation of knowing the Bible by heart. Walford actually sat in the chimney corner of the house, employing his mind in composing a sermon or two for the Sabbath delivery. And on one occasion, paying him a visit, he repeated to me 2 or 3 pieces he had composed. And having no friend at home to commit them to paper, he had them laid up in the storehouse of his mind. How will this do? Asked he, as he repeated the following lines. And I rapidly copied the lines with my pencil and uttered them and sent them in America to the New York Observer. They were printed September 13th, 1845, what this man had written. And William Bradbury put notes to him. And it was the man's strength that took him through life. And they went, sweet hour of prayer that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne make all my wants and wishes known. In seasons of distress and grief, My soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer. Thy wings shall my petition bear. To him whose truth and faithfulness engage the waiting soul to bless. And since he bids me seek his face, believe his word, and trust his grace, I'll cast on him my every care and wait for thee. Sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer. May I thy consolation share, till from Mount Pisgah's lofty height. Pisgah is where Moses went to overlook the holy land that he could never go to, but he could see it from Pisgah. And that's what this author called prayer. It's where I can see glory, though I'm not there yet. And from Mount Pisgah's lofty height, I'll view my home and take my flight. This robe of flesh I'll drop and rise to seize the everlasting prize and shout while passing through the air. Farewell, farewell, sweet hour of prayer. No longer will I need it because I will see him face to face. You lay it down at the feet of Christ. Kendall, you and Val, coming up here. I want them to sing a song, not from William Bradbury, but from another great hymn writer, Larry Gatlin, from Odessa, Texas. A fellow who went through a lot of struggles coming to faith. Had an interesting arrangement of an old hymn. Father in heaven, I pray if there's anyone here that needs to know the Savior, that has made, as David, a mess of things, that has had a major faux pas, a major turn in the path of life, and now that they're back on it and the residuals come back of funerals and pain, that we might know how to best navigate in the fog. We lay it down at Christ's feet, thanking you for your mercy. In his name we ask it. Amen.